An elderly woman walked into the veterans' hall carrying a cloth bundle. Inside, tarnished medals, faded ribbons, bent service pins. The volunteers laughed. Flea market junk, they whispered. Fake, someone posted online. The town decided who Margaret Hayes was, a quiet hospital clerk, unremarkable, invisible. They never asked who she had been, but when a young veteran collapsed during a flashback, Margaret moved with precision no civilian should possess. She recognized his battalion patch. She grounded him with the exact right words. She knew things hospital clerks don't know. Then a black sedan arrived. A four-star general stepped out, walked to her door, and saluted. Master Sergeant Margaret Hayes, he said loud enough for the whole street to hear. The medals weren't fake. They were just too heavy to shine. This is the true story of the hero they almost threw away. Hit subscribe to USX Stories for more inspiring tales of military valor and veteran experiences. The Veterans Hall smelled of burnt coffee and old wood, the kind of place where time seemed to slow out of respect for the memories held inside its walls. Folding tables lined the room in uneven rows, covered with handwritten signs, paper cups, and mismatched donation boxes. Near the entrance, a cardboard box sat beneath a marker-written label that read Military Memorabilia Donations. An elderly woman stepped forward from the short line. She moved carefully, but not weakly. In her hands was a small cloth bundle, folded more times than necessary, edges softened by age and use. She placed it gently on the table as if setting down something fragile. The cloth opened just enough to reveal what was inside. Tarnished medals, faded ribbons, bent service pins with dulled metal. Two volunteers glanced down. One of them snorted under his breath. The other leaned closer and whispered, not quite quiet enough. Those look like flea market junk. A soft chuckle followed. The woman heard it. Her eyes did not lift. She did not ask what they meant. She simply reached forward, gathered the cloth, and folded it back over the metal. Slow, careful, precise. Her fingers were thin but steady, the kind of hands that had done the same motions thousands of times. Around her, the hall continued its low hum. Coffee cups clinked against saucers. Someone laughed near the back. A chair scraped across the floor. One of the volunteers cleared his throat. "You know," he said, forcing a polite tone, "you might want to keep those. They probably aren't worth anything." The woman looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once. No argument. No explanation. No visible hurt. She slid the bundle into the box anyway. For a brief second, the noise in the room felt heavier, thicker, like something unspoken had settled between the folding tables. Her name was Margaret Hayes. Most people in town called her Maggie. She was 78 years old, a widow, and she lived alone in a small weathered house 3BL. Ox from Main Street. To most people, Margaret Hayes blended into the sidewalks and storefront reflections like background scenery. Familiar, unremarkable, easy to overlook. In the town's collective memory, Margaret Hayes had always been the same woman, quiet, polite, invisible. If anyone was asked what Maggie did for a living, they would say she worked at the county hospital for decades as an administrative clerk, filing paperwork, answering phones, scheduling appointments. The kind of job no one ever thought twice about. A safe job, a simple job, a forgettable job. That version of Maggie fit neatly into the small mental box the town had created for her. She was the woman who donated canned soup every month to the food pantry. The woman who wrote small checks to the high school band fundraiser. The woman who sat by herself at town picnics with a folded napkin on her lap and a paper plate balanced carefully on her knees. People nodded at her. People smiled. Very few people stopped. No one asked questions. Maggie never gave them a reason to. Her days followed a rhythm that rarely changed. She woke before sunrise, not by alarm, but by habit. She brewed a single cup of tea and sat at her kitchen table while steam rose slowly from the mug. No radio, no television, just the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic starting up beyond her street. Once a week, she wiped down the same wooden shelf in her living room. The shelf held nothing more than a framed photo of a younger man in civilian clothes, a small ceramic bird, and an old clock that no longer kept time. She dusted the empty space beside them too, even though nothing had sat there for years. In the back of her bedroom closet, behind winter coats and folded sweaters, sat a pair of boots. They were polished, not new, not shiny, but clean. They had not been worn in decades. Beneath her bed rested an old green footlocker. The paint was chipped. The metal corners were dull. It stayed closed. Maggie never opened it. Not because she was afraid of what was inside. Because she already knew. When she slept, she always lay on her left side. Always. She never shifted to her back. Never sprawled. Her bed was made every morning with sharp, tight hospital corners, the kind nurses used to be trained on long before fitted sheets became common. Most people would have assumed she picked up the habit working at the hospital. They would have been wrong. Maggie remembered faces more easily than names. She could recall the shape of a jawline, the way someone stood, the way their eyes moved when they were nervous. Names slipped away. Faces stayed. She remembered silence better than noise. Noise faded. Silence stayed with weight. There was no bitterness in Margaret Hayes. No anger at the world. No resentment for being unseen. She did not believe she had been wronged. She did not believe she was owed anything. Her life, as she saw it, had unfolded the way it was supposed to. Some people carried their stories outward. Maggie carried hers inward, like a carefully folded flag, tucked away, protected, never displayed. She never corrected assumptions, never volunteered details, never hinted. When people talked about the military, she listened. When people argued about wars, she stayed quiet. When people praised heroes, she looked down at her hands. Not because she disagreed, not because she felt excluded, but because she knew how complicated the word hero truly was. At night, when the town settled into darkness, Maggie sometimes sat at her small kitchen table and rested her palms flat against the wood. She did not pray. She did not speak. She simply sat, thinking about faces, thinking about voices, thinking about the ones who never made it home. There were moments, small and private, when her jaw tightened, when her breathing slowed, when something old stirred behind her eyes. But it never spilled over, never outward, never visible. By morning, she was once again just Margaret Hayes, the quiet woman who walked everywhere, the polite woman who donated canned food, the invisible woman with nothing remarkable about her. That was how the town saw her. That was how Maggie allowed herself to be seen. She never brought the medals for praise. She brought them because they no longer belonged only to her. The morning after the donation drive, the Veterans Hall felt less like a place of honor and more like a backroom full of clutter. Behind the main table, two volunteers sorted through the memorabilia box. They handled framed photos with careful hands. They lifted a folded flag as if it were holy. But when Margaret Hayes's cloth bundle came into view, their movements changed. One of them held it between finger and thumb like it might leave grime behind. "Here's the rust pile," he said. The other volunteer laughed, short and sharp. Probably stuff from a garage sale. He turned the medals over, squinting at the dull metal like it was a coin he couldn't recognize. "Think it's worth anything?" he asked, already grinning. "Scrap," the first one said. "Maybe $5, if that." The words landed like they belonged in a different room. Not here. Not under the faded banner that read, "We remember." Someone passing behind them heard and chimed in without looking up. Everybody claims they served nowadays. It wasn't even cruel in their minds. It was just an opinion. Just a punchline. Just another small town's certainty spoken aloud. Maggie wasn't there to hear it. But the sound of it traveled anyway. Because words always did. By Friday, the social media post had traveled farther than anyone expected. It started with one volunteer snapping a quick photo on his phone. A close-up shot of tarnished metals spread across a table like scattered coins. The caption read, "Sorting donations and found this rust pile face with tears of joy. Somebody's trying too hard." People reacted the way they always did online. A few laughing FACS. A few jokes about pawn shops. Someone commented, "Probably fake." Someone else wrote, "Stolen valor is everywhere now." The words stacked on top of each other like bricks, building a wall around a story they had invented without proof. Maggie never saw the post. She didn't own a smartphone. She didn't scroll. She didn't argue. But she didn't need to see it for it to reach her. The woman at the food pantry mentioned it casually as Maggie dropped off her usual donation bag. The cashier at the hardware store offered a sympathetic smile that didn't belong. A neighbor's teenage son whispered to his friend as Maggie passed on the sidewalk, "Is that the lady with the fake medals?" That was the moment the town finally attached a name. Maggie did not slow down. Her posture stayed upright. Her steps stayed steady. But inside, something tightened. A knot forming quietly. Not from shame, but from an old kind of exhaustion. the kind that comes from being misunderstood and realizing you will not correct it, because correcting it would require opening a door she had spent a lifetime keeping shut. The shift did not happen all at once. There was no announcement, no dramatic moment where everyone suddenly realized they had made a mistake. It began with small disruptions in the story the town had already decided was true. On a quiet Wednesday afternoon, Maggie stood at the coffee table during the community lunch, stirring sugar into her tea. Her sleeve rode up slightly as she lifted the spoon, just enough to reveal a thin, pale line running along the inside of her forearm. An old scar. Not surgical, not smooth, jagged at one end. One of the volunteers saw it. "Burn?" she asked. Maggie gently pulled her sleeve back down. "No," she said. That was all. No explanation followed. The volunteer didn't ask again, but something about it lingered. 2 days later, Maggie came in that afternoon to drop off a bag of donated socks. As she passed the memorabilia table, she noticed the volunteers stacking medals into a shallow cardboard tray. They placed them face down, one on top of another. Maggie stopped. It was subtle, a half step, a small pause. She looked at the tray, then at the volunteer. "Never stack them face down," she said. Her voice was calm, not sharp, not accusing. The volunteer blinked. "Why?" Maggie hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. "They scratch easier that way." It was true, but it wasn't the whole reason. The volunteer shrugged and flipped the medals over. "Didn't know that," he said. Maggie nodded. She started to walk away. Then she stopped herself from saying something else. A word had nearly slipped out. A specific term. A classification. Something no hospital clerk would normally know. Her mouth closed. She continued toward the door. No one noticed, but something about it lingered. Saturday morning, a military helicopter passed over town on its way toward the training range outside the county limits. It was loud, deep, the kind of sound that made window WS vibrate. Most people in the parking lot stopped and looked up. Some shaded their eyes. Some pointed. Maggie did not look up. Her head did not turn. Her hands paused at her sides. Her lips moved, not forming words, just moving. 1, 2, 3, 4. The sound faded into the distance. Maggie resumed walking. No one noticed her counting. No one noticed how still she had become. No one noticed how quickly she relaxed once the noise was gone. The town's version of Maggie did not fit these moments. Hospital clerks didn't recognize ribbon patterns. They didn't correct metal storage. They didn't stop themselves from using military terminology. They didn't carry unexplained scars. They didn't count helicopters. The pieces didn't line up. Not enough to prove anything. Not enough to accuse anyone of being wrong. Just enough to feel uneasy. Like a story that had been told too quickly. Like a conclusion that had been reached without evidence. The laughter had already faded. Now something else replaced it. Uncertainty. Questions no one wanted to ask out loud. The story was wrong. No one knew how wrong. The community lunch at the Veterans Hall was usually uneventful. Plates of casserole, paper napkins, soft conversation about weather and local news. It was a place where nothing sudden was supposed to happen. That was part of its comfort. Maggie arrived the way she always did, quietly. She set her coat over the back of a folding chair near the wall and poured herself a cup of tea. She nodded politely to a volunteer who nodded back, neither of them saying anything. Near the entrance stood a man in his late 20s or early 30s. Most people didn't know him. He had moved to town recently. Some said he worked construction. Others said he had come to help a family member. What little was known was that he had served. He wore a plain hoodie and jeans. On the left shoulder of the hoodie was a small faded patch, not flashy, not decorative, but anyone who had worn a uniform would have recognized it. The man stood with his hands shoved into his pockets, shifting his weight. His jaw was tight. His eyes kept drifting toward the far corner of the room where a group of volunteers were stacking metal chairs. The sound was sharp, metal legs scraping against concrete. The chairs bumped together with hollow clangs. The noise echoed. Once, twice, 3 times. The man flinched, not dramatically, not in a way most people would notice. His shoulders rose slightly. His breath caught. He swallowed. Another chair scraped. Louder this time. The man's head snapped to the side. His eyes lost focus. His breathing changed. Short, shallow, fast. Someone nearby assumed he was feeling sick. "You all right?" a woman asked. He nodded quickly. Too quickly. "I'm fine," he said, but his voice wavered. Another chai. Or hit the stack and tipped. It crashed onto the floor. The sound rang through the hall. The man's knees buckled. He dropped straight down, not collapsing in a faint, not slumping. He folded in on himself like his body had lost its instructions. People gasped. Someone shouted his name, though no one was sure what his name actually was. A couple of volunteers started toward him, unsure what to do. Maggie moved. Immediately. No hesitation. No looking around for permission. She set her tea on the nearest table and crossed the room with long, steady strides that did not match her age. "Give him space," she said. Her voice was calm, not loud, but it cut through the noise. People instinctively stepped back. Maggie knelt beside the man, not in front of him, not hovering over his face. She positioned herself slightly to his side, at an angle that allowed him to see her without feeling trapped. She placed one hand flat on the floor. The other hovered near his shoulder, not touching yet. "Look at me," she said. The man's eyes flicked toward her. They were wide, unfocused. His chest was rising and falling in rapid bursts. Maggie kept her voice even. "Breathe with me." She inhaled slowly, deep, exaggerated just enough to be seen. Then she exhaled, long, controlled. "Follow me," she said. "In, out." The man tried, failed, tried again. Maggie did not rush him. She did not tell him to calm down. She did not ask what was wrong. She stayed on rhythm. In, out, in, out. She placed 2 fingers lightly on his wrist, checked his pulse. Her thumb adjusted slightly. She nodded once to herself. Fast but strong. She shifted her body closer, placing one knee on the ground, one foot planted, giving herself stability. She gently guided his shoulders so his back was supported against a table leg. Not flat, not slumped. Supported. "You're safe," she said quietly. "You're home." The words landed differently than comfort talk. They weren't soft. They weren't emotional. They were factual, like a statement of location. The man's breathing stuttered, then slowed a fraction. His eyes stayed locked on Maggie. She did not look away. In, out, in, out. A volunteer crouched nearby. "Should I call an ambulance?" Maggie shook her head slightly. "Not yet," she said. Her tone wasn't dismissive. It was measured. The volunteer froze. He wasn't used to being told what to do by Margaret Hayes. Maggie glanced at the man's hoodie, at the small patch on his shoulder. Her eyes narrowed just a touch. "3rd Battalion," she said, then corrected herself. "Ravens." The man swallowed. His jaw tightened. He nodded. "Barely." "How do you know that?" someone whispered behind them. Maggie did not answer. She stayed focused on the man. "Stay with me," she said. "You're not there. You're here. In the hall. In town. With people." The man's hands, which had been clenched into fists, began to loosen. His shoulders dropped slightly. A minute passed. Then another. The scraping chairs had stopped. The room had gone quiet without anyone formally asking for silence. People stood frozen, watching, not with curiosity, with something closer to confusion. Maggie adjusted her fingers on the man's wrist. Checked again. She nodded. "Good," she said. Not praise. Confirmation. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small packet of sugar. She tore it open and held it near his mouth. "Just a little," she said. He took it. His breathing steadied further. His eyes began to focus. "Thank you," he whispered. Maggie gave a small nod. Nothing more. She did not ask his name. She did not offer hers. She did not tell a story. When she was satisfied that his legs would hold him, she placed one hand under his elbow. "One foot," she said. He followed. Other foot. She helped him stand, not lifting him, guiding him. He stood, wobbly but upright. A volunteer rushed forward with a chair. Maggie guided the man into it. She waited until he was settled. Then she stood, smoothed her sweater, picked up her tea from the table where she had left it, and walked back to her seat near the wall. Just like that. No announcement. No explanation. The room stayed silent. People looked at each other. Someone whispered, "How does she know that?" No one answered. The man sat quietly, staring at his hands. A volunteer handed him water. He drank slowly. His breathing stayed steady. Across the room, Maggie sat with her cup between her palms. Her posture was the same as it had always been. Straight, contained, calm. Nothing about her expression suggested she had done anything unusual. But the narrative the town had been clinging to no longer fit. Hospital clerks did not take control of trauma responses. They did not assess pulses without thinking. They did not position bodies instinctively. They did not recognize battalion patches. They did not ground combat veterans with the right words. The story had cracked. Not shattered. Not yet. But cracked enough for light to slip through. Maggie never explained. She never justified. She never looked around to see who had noticed. She finished her tea, folded her coat over her arm, and walked out of the hall the same way she always did. Slow. Steady. Alone. The mystery did not fade with her departure. It grew, quietly, relentlessly. Part 6. The General Arrives. 2 weeks passed. The town did what it always did. It talked, quietly now, carefully. The jokes about rusty metals stopped. The laughter never returned. But no one openly apologized either. Life settled into an uneasy normal. On a calm Tuesday afternoon, a black sedan rolled slowly down Maggie's street. It did not belong there. The paint was clean. The windows were dark. It moved with purpose. It stopped in front of Margaret Hayes's modest house. The engine shut off. Doors opened. A man in a formal army service uniform stepped out. FO. UR stars rested on his shoulders. His posture was rigid. His movements precise. Anyone who had ever seen a high-ranking officer before knew exactly what they were looking at. A general. Neighbors noticed. Mrs. Collins across the street paused while watering her flowers. A man working on his truck lowered his hood. 2 teenagers on bicycles slowed to a stop. The general walked up Maggie's front path, past the peeling paint, past the quiet wind chimes. He stopped at the door, knocked once. Firm, respectful. Inside, Maggie stood from her kitchen table. She did not look surprised. She walked to the door, opened it. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. They looked at each other. Recognition passed between them. Not curiosity, not confusion. Recognition. The general straightened. His spine snapped to attention. He raised his hand, and he saluted. Master Sergeant Margaret Hayes, he said. The words carried across the quiet street. Every neighbor froze. Maggie did not return the salute. She did not step back. She simply looked at him. Yes, she said. The general lowered his hand. I apologize for arriving unannounced, he said. I was informed that your medals were recently misunderstood. Maggie said nothing. The general continued. Those medals belong to a classified unit attached to special operations during the early years of the Gulf War. Mrs. Collins's watering can tipped slightly. Water spilled onto the sidewalk. The general's voice remained steady. You served as forward reconnaissance and sniper overwatch for multiple joint task forces. No pride colored his words. No dramatics. Only fact. Your operational record remains sealed by your request, he said. You never sought recognition. You never filed for awards. You never corrected assumptions. Maggie's gaze did not waver. The general nodded once. Ma'am, he said, I am here to formally acknowledge your service. The street felt smaller, quieter, heavier. Maggie exhaled slowly. That won't be necessary, she said. The general met her eyes. With respect, he said, it already is. Maggie said nothing more. The truth had arrived. Not as a speech, not as a spectacle, but as a fact, standing on her front porch in broad daylight. Impossible to laugh away. Impossible to ignore. The ceremony was scheduled quietly. No posters. No announcements in the paper. No speeches advertised in advance. Only a simple note taped to the Veterans Hall door. Community gathering. Thursday, 6 p.m. Most people assumed it was another routine meeting. A potluck. A fundraiser. Something small. By the time Thursday arrived, the hall was full. Not crowded. Not packed. But fuller than usual. Chairs were arranged in straight rows instead of loose circles. A small podium stood at the front. An American flag was positioned beside it. The air felt different. Tighter. Maggie arrived alone, as she always did. She wore a plain dark sweater. No jewelry. No pins. No medals. She took a seat near the aisle, halfway back, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. People noticed her now. They did not stare. They did not whisper. They simply watched. The general entered without ceremony. No introduction. No escort. He walked to the front of the room and stopped beside the podium. The low murmur of conversation faded. He did not wait for absolute silence. He did not clear his throat. He spoke when the room was quiet enough to hear him. I'm not here to tell war stories, he said. I'm not here to talk about battles, body counts, or victories. He looked out over the audience. I'm here to acknowledge service. He turned slightly, looked toward Maggie. She stayed when others rotated home. The words were simple, plain. They did not put her name on buildings. They did not put her face on posters. She did not ask them to. The general paused. She covered men who never knew her name. No one moved. Many of you are alive because of her. The sentence did not echo. It did not swell with dramatic emphasis. It landed quietly, and somehow, that made it heavier. The general stepped away from the podium. He walked down the center aisle. Each step measured. Each step deliberate. He stopped in front of Maggie. For a moment, they looked at each other. Not like strangers. Not like superior and subordinate. Like two people who shared an understanding that did not need words. The general straightened. He raised his hand. He saluted. The sound of fabric shifting filled the room. Not applause. Not cheering. Movement. One veteran stood. Then another. Then another. They did not speak. They did not look around to see who else was rising. They simply rose. Each one facing Maggie. Each one raising a hand. The room became a forest of salutes. No one counted them. No one needed to. The only sound was the quiet slide of chairs moving back. The soft brush of sleeves. Breathing. Maggie remained seated. She did not return the salute. She did not step forward. She did not bow her head. Her hands hung at her sides. They shook, just slightly. Enough to notice. Not enough to draw attention. Her face remained composed. Not proud. Not embarrassed. Not triumphant. Steady. Contained. She nodded once. A small motion, barely visible, but it carried weight. The general lowered his hand. The others followed. No one rushed to speak. No one broke the moment. Maggie took a breath. Then another. They weren't rusty, she said. Her voice was quiet. It did not carry far, but the room was listening. They were heavy. No one responded. No one needed to. The words settled into the space between them. Not as a correction. Not as a defense. As a truth. Maggie did not stay for handshakes. She did not wait for congratulations. She picked up her coat, folded it over her arm, and walked toward the exit. People stepped aside without being asked. Not out of fear. Not out of obligation. Out of respect. The door closed softly behind her. Inside the hall, no one spoke for several seconds. Some people stared at the floor. Some stared at the flag. Some stared at the empty space where Maggie had been standing. The town story about Margaret Hayes had finally ended. A different one had taken its place. Not a loud story. Not a flashy one. A true one. And true stories, when finally heard, do not ask for applause. They ask for silence. Maggie walked home the same way she always did. No ride. No escort. No one following behind her. The streetlights hummed softly. The wind chimes on her porch stirred as she stepped onto the worn wooden boards. Inside her house, nothing felt different. The clock on the wall still ticked unevenly. The kitchen light still flickered for half a second before settling. Her chair still waited at the small table near the window. Maggie set her coat over the back of the chair. She poured herself a cup of tea. She sat. For a long moment, she did nothing. No replaying speeches. No replaying salutes. No searching her memory for reactions. Eventually, she stood and walked into her bedroom. The old green footlocker came out from beneath the bed. She opened it. Inside were the medals. The same tarnished metal. The same faded ribbons. The same bent pins. She lifted them one by one. Not with ceremony. Not with reverence. With familiarity. Like objects that had always been part of her. On the dresser sat a simple wooden shadow box. No engraving. No brass plate. No glass meant to impress. Maggie arranged the medals inside carefully. Straight. Even. Facing up. When she finished, she closed the lid. She did not hang it in the living room. She did not place it near the front door. She set it on the shelf in her bedroom, beside the old clock, next to the ceramic bird, where only she would see it. The next morning, Maggie woke before sunrise. She brewed her tea. She folded the newspaper. She made her bed with sharp corners. Later that day, she walked to the grocery store. She bought canned soup. She dropped it off at the food pantry. She nodded to the volunteer. She walked home. No one stopped her. No one asked questions. No one needed proof anymore. But Maggie did not change. She did not tell stories. She did not correct assumptions. She did not start conversations. She remained the same quiet woman she had always been. Because recognition had never been the reason, many heroes never tell their stories. Not because they are hiding. Not because they are ashamed. But because the story was never about them. Some medals shine under spotlights. Some shine only in memory. Some carry weight no polish could ever remove. Respect should never REQ. Wireproof. It should never depend on how loud someone is. It should never depend on what they wear. Margaret Hayes had lived an entire life knowing exactly who she was. The world had simply taken longer to catch up. True courage doesn't announce itself. It waits to be recognized by the right eyes. There are men and women all around us who carry entire lifetimes of service in complete silence. They stand in grocery store lines. They walk down quiet streets. They sit alone at community tables. No uniforms. No ribbons on display. No stories offered. Not because their service was small. Not because it didn't matter. But because to them, it was simply their duty. The next time you pass someone who seems ordinary, remember this. You don't know what they've carried. You don't know who they've protected. You don't know what they gave up so others could live peaceful lives. Honor doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like a quiet walk home. Sometimes it looks like a cup of tea at sunrise. Sometimes it looks like a pair of heavy medals tucked away in a simple box. Never judge a book by its cover. True heroes don't always wear their stories on their sleeves. Some carry them silently in their hearts. Respect should be given freely, not withheld until proof is demanded. The quietest person in the room may be the one who has sacrificed the most. Before we mock, dismiss, or assume we know someone's story, we should remember that dignity and honor are earned through actions, not announcements. If you enjoyed this story of courage and silent sacrifice, please subscribe to USX Stories for more inspiring tales of military valor and veteran experiences. These stories keep the memory of true heroes alive for generations to come. Hit that subscribe button and share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.